scoring points at moments when it didn't matter, and losing one landslide election after another to him. Interpretation. Roosevelt could not bear to feel cornered, to have no options. This was partly because of his flexible nature. He preferred to bend to circumstances, changing direction effortlessly as needed. It also came out of his physical limitations. He hated to feel hemmed in and helpless. Early on, when Roosevelt campaigned in the usual aggressive way of American politics, arguing his case and attacking his opponents, he felt hopelessly constricted. Through experiment, he learned the power of holding back. Now he let his opponents make the first move. Whether by attacking him or by detailing their own positions, they would expose themselves, giving him openings to use their own words against them later on. By staying silent under their attacks, he would goad them into going too far. Nothing is more infuriating than engaging with someone and getting no response, and ending up shrill and irrational, which played badly with the public. Once their own aggression had made them vulnerable, Roosevelt would come in for the kill. Roosevelt's style can be likened to jiu-jitsu, the Japanese art of self-defense. In jiu-jitsu, a fighter baits opponents by staying calm and patient, getting them to make the first aggressive move. As they come at the fighter and either strike at him or grab hold of him, either push or pull, the fighter moves with them, using their strength against them. As he deftly steps forward or back at the right moment, the force of their own momentum throws them off balance. Often they actually fall. And even if they don't, they leave themselves vulnerable to a counterblow. Their aggression becomes their weakness, for it commits them to an obvious attack, exposing their strategy and making it hard for them to stop. In politics, jiu-jitsu style yields endless benefits. It gives you the ability to fight without seeming aggressive. It saves energy, for your opponents tire while you stay above the fray. And it widens your options, allowing you to build on what they give you. Aggression is deceptive. It inherently hides weakness. Aggressors cannot control their emotions. They cannot wait for the right moment, cannot try different approaches, cannot stop to think about how to take their enemies by surprise. In that first wave of aggression, they seem strong, but the longer their attack goes on, the clearer their underlying weakness and insecurity become. It is easy to give in to impatience and make the first move, but there is more strength in holding back, patiently letting the other person make the play. That inner strength will almost always prevail over outward aggression. Time is on your side. Make your counterattacks swift and sudden, like the cat who creeps on padded paws to suddenly pounce on its prey. Make jiu-jitsu your style in almost everything you do. It is your way of responding to aggression in everyday life, your way of facing circumstances. Let events come to you, saving valuable time and energy for those brief moments when you blaze with the counterattack. By Vladimir Lenin. The soundest strategy in war is to postpone operations until the moral disintegration of the enemy renders the delivery of the mortal blow both possible and easy. Keys to warfare. Thousands of years ago, at the dawn of military history, various strategists in different cultures noticed a peculiar phenomenon. In battle, the side that was on the defensive often won in the end. There seemed to be several reasons for this. First, once the aggressor went on the attack, he had no more surprises in store. The defender could clearly see his strategy and take protective action. Second, if the defender could somehow turn back this initial attack, the aggressor would be left in a weak position. His army was disorganized and exhausted. It requires more energy to take land than to hold it. If the defenders could take advantage of this weakness to deliver a counterblow, they could often force the aggressor to retreat. Based on these observations, the art of the counterattack was developed. Its basic tenets were to let the enemy make the first move, actively baiting him into an aggressive attack that would expend his energy and unbalance his lines, then taking advantage of his weakness and disorganization. This art was refined by theorists such as Sun Tzu and practiced to perfection by leaders like Philip of Macedon. The counterattack is, in fact, the origin of modern strategy, the first real example of an indirect approach to war. It represents a major breakthrough in thinking. Instead of being brutal and direct, the counterattack is subtle and deceptive, using the enemy's energy and aggression to bring about his downfall. Although it is one of the oldest and most basic strategies in warfare, it remains in many ways the most effective and has proven highly adaptable to modern conditions. It is the strategy choice of Napoleon Bonaparte, T.E. Lawrence, Erwin Rommel, and Mao Zedong. The counterattack principle is infinitely applicable to any competitive environment or form of conflict, since it is based on certain truths of human nature. We are inherently impatient creatures. We find it hard to wait. We want our desires to be satisfied as quickly as possible. This is a tremendous weakness, for it means that in any given situation, we often commit ourselves without enough thought. In charging ahead, we limit our options and get ourselves into trouble. Patience, on the other hand, particularly in war, pays unlimited dividends. It allows us to sniff out opportunities, to time a counterblow that will catch the enemy by surprise. A person who can lie back and wait for the right moment to take action will almost always have an advantage over those who give in to their natural impatience. The first step in mastering the counterattack is to master yourself, and particularly the tendency to grow emotional in conflict. When the great baseball player Ted Williams made the major leagues with the Boston Red Sox, he took a look around. He was now a member of an elite, the best hitters in the country. They all had sharp vision, quick reflexes, and strong arms, but relatively few of them could control their impatience at the plate, and pitchers preyed on that weakness, getting them to swing on losing pitches. Williams separated himself out and made himself perhaps the greatest pure hitter in baseball history by developing his patience and a kind of hitter's counterattack. He would wait and keep waiting for the best pitch to swing at. Good pitchers are masters at making a hitter feel frustrated and emotional, but Williams would not be baited. Whatever they did, he would wait for the pitch that was right for him. In fact, he turned the situation around. Given his ability to wait, it was the pitcher, not Williams, who would end up impatient and throwing the wrong pitch as a result. Once you learn patience, your options suddenly expand. Instead of wearing yourself out in little wars, you can save your energy for the right moment, take advantage of other people's mistakes, and think clearly in difficult situations. You will see opportunities for counterattack where others see only surrender or retreat. The key to the successful counterattack is staying calm while your opponent gets frustrated and irritable. In 16th century Japan, there emerged a novel way of fighting called shinkage. The swordsman would begin the fight by mirroring his opponent's every move, copying his every footstep, every blink, every gesture, every twitch. This would drive the enemy crazy, for he would be unable to read the shinkage samurai's moves or get any sense of what he was up to. At some point, he would lose patience and strike out, lowering his guard. The shinkage samurai would inevitably parry this attack and follow up with a fatal counterblow. Shinkage samurai believed that the advantage in a life-and-death sword fight lay not in aggression, but in passivity. By mirroring their enemy's moves, they could understand his strategy and thinking. By being calm and observant, patient, they could detect when their opponent had decided to attack. The moment would register in his eyes, or in a slight movement of his hands. The more irritated he became, and the harder he tried to hit the shinkage fighter, the greater his imbalance and vulnerability. Shinkage samurai were virtually unbeatable. Mirroring people, giving back to them just what they give you, is a powerful method of counterattack. In daily life, mirroring and passivity can charm people. flattering them into lowering their defenses and opening themselves to attack. It can also irritate and discomfort them. Their thoughts become yours. You are feeding off them like a vampire, your passive front disguising the control you are exercising over their minds. Meanwhile, you are giving them nothing of yourself. They cannot see through you. Your counterattack will come as a complete surprise to them. The counterattack is a particularly effective strategy against what might be called the barbarian, the man or woman who is especially aggressive by nature. Do not be intimidated by these types. They are in fact weak and are easily swayed and deceived. The trick is to goad them by playing weak or stupid while dangling in front of them the prospect of easy gains. During the era of the warring states in ancient China, the state of Qi found itself threatened by the powerful armies of the state of Wei. The Qi general consulted the famous strategist Sun Bin, a descendant of Sun Tzu himself, who told him that the Wei general looked down on the armies of Qi, believing that their soldiers were cowards. That, said Sun Bin, was the key to victory. He proposed a plan. Enter Wei territory with a large army and make thousands of campfires. The next day, make half that number of campfires, and the day after that, half that number again. Putting his trust in Sun Bin, the Qi general did as he was told. The Wei general, of course, was carefully monitoring the invasion, and he noted the dwindling campfires. Given his predisposition to see the Qi soldiers as cowards, what could this mean but that they were defecting? He would advance with his cavalry and crush this weak army. His infantry would follow, and they would march into Qi itself. Sun Bin, hearing of the approaching Wei cavalry and calculating how fast they were moving, retreated and stationed the Qi army in a narrow pass in the mountains. He had a large tree cut down and stripped of its bark, then wrote on the bare log, "The general of Wei will die at this tree." He set the log in the path of the pursuing Wei army, then hid archers on both sides of the pass. In the middle of the night, the Wei general, at the head of his cavalry, reached the place where the log blocked the road. Something was written on it. He ordered a torch lit to read it. The torchlight was the signal and the lure. The Qi archers rained arrows on the trapped Wei horsemen. The Wei general, realizing he had been tricked, killed himself. Sun Bin based his baiting of the Wei general on his knowledge of the man's personality, which was arrogant and violent. By turning these qualities to his advantage, encouraging his enemy's greed and aggression, Sun Bin could control the man's mind. You too should look for the emotion that your enemies are least able to manage, then bring it to the surface. With a little work on your part, they will lay themselves open to your counterattack. In our own time, the family therapist J. Haley has observed that for many difficult people, acting out is a strategy, a method of control. They give themselves the license to be impossible and neurotic. If you react by getting angry and trying to make them stop, you are doing just what they want. They are engaging your emotions and dominating your attention. If, on the other hand, you simply let them run amok, you put them still more in control. But Haley discovered that if you encourage their difficult behavior, agree with their paranoid ideas, and push them to go further, you turn the dynamic around. This is not what they want or expect. Now they're doing what you want, which takes the fun out of it. It is the jujitsu strategy. You are using their energy against them. In general, encouraging people to follow their natural direction, to give in to their greed or neuroses, will give you more control over them than active resistance will. Either they get themselves into terrible trouble, or they become hopelessly confused, all of which plays into your hands. Whenever you find yourself on the defensive and in trouble, the greatest danger is the impulse to overreact. You will often exaggerate your enemy's strength, seeing yourself as weaker than is actually the case. A key principle of counterattack is never to see a situation as hopeless. No matter how strong your enemies seem, they have vulnerabilities you can prey upon and use to develop a counterattack. Your own weakness can become a strength if you play it right. With a little clever manipulation, you can always turn things around. That is how you must look at every apparent problem and difficulty. An enemy seems powerful because he has a particular strength or advantage. Maybe it's money and resources. Maybe it's the size of his army or of his territory. Maybe, more subtly, it's his moral standing and reputation. Whatever his strength might be, it is actually a potential weakness, simply because he relies on it. Neutralize it, and he is vulnerable. Your task is to put him in a situation in which he cannot use his advantage. In 480 BC, when the Persian king Xerxes invaded Greece, he had a huge advantage in the size of his army, and particularly his navy. But the Athenian general Themistocles was able to turn that strength into weakness. He lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits off the island of Salamis. In these choppy, difficult waters, the very size of the fleet, its apparent strength, became a nightmare. It was completely unable to maneuver. The Greeks counterattacked and destroyed it, ending the invasion. If your opponent's advantage comes from a superior style of fighting, the best way to neutralize it is to learn from it, adapting it to your own purposes. In the 19th century, the Apaches of the American Southwest were for many years able to torment U.S. troops through guerrilla-style tactics that were perfectly suited to the terrain. Nothing seemed to work until General George Crook hired disaffected Apaches to teach him their way of fighting and serve as scouts. Adapting their style of warfare, Crook neutralized the Apaches' strengths and finally defeated them. As you neutralize your enemy's strengths, you must similarly reverse your own weaknesses. If your forces are small, for example, they are also mobile. Use that mobility to counterattack. Perhaps your reputation is lower than your opponent's. That just means you have less to lose. Sling mud. Some of it will stick, and gradually your enemy will sink to your level. Always find ways to turn your weakness to advantage. Difficulties with other people are inevitable. You must be willing to defend yourself and sometimes to take the offensive. The modern dilemma is that taking the offensive is unacceptable today. Attack, and your reputation will suffer. You will find yourself politically isolated, and you will create enemies and resistance. The counterattack is the answer. Let your enemy make the first move, then play the victim. Without overt manipulation on your part, you can control your opponent's minds. Bait them into a rash attack. When it ends up in disaster, they will have only themselves to blame, and everyone around them will blame them too. You win both the battle of appearances and the battle on the field. Very few strategies offer such flexibility and power. Reversal. The counterattack strategy cannot be applied in every situation. There will always be times when it is better to initiate the attack yourself, gaining control by putting your opponents on the defensive before they have time to think. Look at the details of the situation. If the enemy is too smart to lose patience and attack you, or if you have too much to lose by waiting, go on the offensive. It is also usually best to vary your methods, always having more than one strategy to draw on. If your enemies think you always wait to counterattack, you have the perfect setup for moving first and surprising them. So mix things up. Watch the situation and make it impossible for your opponents to predict what you will do. Here are further reflections on the counterattack strategy. From a 17th century Ming Dynasty text quoted in The Tao of Spycraft by Ralph D. Sawyer. The technique of according with the enemy's expectations and desires requires first determining what they believe and want, then apparently conforming to them until the situation can be exploited. Definition. When the enemy wants to take something and you yield it, it is termed according with. In general, when going contrary to something merely solidifies it, it is better to accord with it in order to lead them to flaws. If the enemy wants to advance, be completely flexible and display weakness in order to induce an advance. If the enemy wants to withdraw, disperse and open an escape route for their retreat. If the enemy is relying upon a strong front, Establish your own front lines far off, solidly assuming a defensive posture in order to observe their arrogance. If the enemy relies upon their awesomeness, be emptily respectful, but substantially plan while awaiting their laxness. Draw them forward and cover them. Release and capture them. Exploit their arrogance. Capitalize on their laxity. By Karl von Clausewitz. A rapid, powerful transition to the attack, the glinting sword of vengeance, is the most brilliant moment of the defense. From History of the Art of War in the Middle Ages, by Sir Charles Oman. A sudden inspiration then came to William at the Battle of Hastings, A.D. 1066, suggested by the disaster which had befallen the English right in the first conflict. He determined to try the expedient of a feigned flight, a stratagem not unknown to Bretons and Normans of earlier ages. By his orders, a considerable portion of the assailants suddenly wheeled about and retired in seeming disorder. The English thought, with more excuse on this occasion than on the last, that the enemy was indeed routed, and for the second time a great body of them broke the line and rushed after the retreating squadrons. When they were well on their way down the slope, William repeated his former procedure. The intact portion of his host fell upon the flanks of the pursuers, while those who had simulated flight faced about and attacked them in front. The result was again a foregone conclusion. The disordered men of the feared were hewn to pieces, and few or none of them escaped back to their comrades on the height. From the Wiles of War, 36 Military Strategies from Ancient China. When the enemy finds itself in a predicament and wants to engage us in a decisive battle, wait. When it is advantageous for the enemy but not for us to fight, wait. When it is expedient to remain still, and whoever moves first will fall into danger, wait. When two enemies are engaged in a fight that will result in defeat or injury, wait. When the enemy forces, though numerous, suffer from mistrust and tend to plot against one another, wait. When the enemy commander, though wise, is handicapped by some of his cohorts, wait. From Secrets of the Samurai, by Oscar Roddy and Adele Westbrook. These two main principles of application are specifically related to the tactical value assigned to the personality of the opponent in combat. According to the unilateral principle of application, the personality of the opponent was considered the primary target of an attack or counterattack for the purpose of either total or partial subjugation. According to the bilateral principle of application, on the other hand, the opponent's personality was viewed not merely as a target, but also, and by certain bujutsu masters primarily, as an instrument, that is, as the unwilling but nevertheless useful vector of his own subjugation. It is the principle of bilateral application, which seems to represent a tactical differentiation between Japanese bujutsu and the martial arts of the West. Lafcadio Hearn, for example, considered this principle a uniquely Oriental idea, asking what Western brain could have elaborated this strange teaching, never to oppose force to force, but only to direct and utilize the power of attack, to overthrow the enemy solely by his own strength, to vanquish him solely by his own efforts. Takuan, writing about the art of swordsmanship in particular, refers to the strategic value of the bilateral principle and the strategy of counterattack against an opponent, when he advised his pupil to make use of his attack by turning it onto himself. Then, his sword meant to kill you becomes your own, and the weapon will fall on the opponent himself. In Zen, this is known as seizing the enemy's spear and using it as the weapon to kill him. The ancient schools of jujutsu were very empathetic on this subject. Jujutsu, literally soft art, as its name implies, is based on the principle of opposing softness or elasticity to hardness or stiffness. Its secret lies in keeping one's body full of qi, with elasticity in one's limbs, and in being ever on the alert to turn the strength of one's foe to one's own advantage, with the minimum employment of one's own muscular force. From the Wiles of War, 36 military strategies from ancient China. To undertake the military operations, the army must prefer stillness to movement. It reveals no shape when still, but exposes its shape in movement. When a rash movement leads to exposure of the shape of the army, it will fall victim to the enemy. But for movement, the tiger and leopard will not fall into trap, the deer will not run into snare, the birds will not be stuck by net, and the fish and turtles will not be caught by hooks. All these animals become prey to man because of their movement. Therefore, the wise man treasures stillness. By keeping still, he can dispel temerity and cope with the temerarious enemy. When the enemy exposes a vulnerable shape, seize the chance to subdue it. The Book of Master Wei Liao observes, the army achieves victory by stillness. Indeed, the army should not move without careful thought, much less take reckless action. From The House at Pooh Corner by A. A. Milne. The Heffalump Trap. Piglet and Pooh have fallen into a hole in the floor of the forest. They have agreed that it is really a heffalump trap, which makes Piglet nervous. He imagines that a heffalump has landed close by. Heffalump, gloatingly. Ho ho! Piglet, carelessly. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la. Heffalump, surprised and not quite so sure of himself. Ho ho! Piglet, more carelessly still. Tiddle-um-tum, tiddle-um-tum. Heffalump, beginning to say ho-ho and turning it awkwardly into a cough. Oh, what's all this? Piglet, surprised. Hello! This is a trap I've made, and I'm waiting for a heffalump to fall into it. Heffalump, greatly disappointed. Oh. After a long silence, are you sure? Piglet, yes. Heffalump, oh. Nervously, I thought it was a trap I'd made to catch piglets. Piglet, surprised. Oh, no. Heffalump, oh. Apologetically, I must have got it wrong then. Piglet, I'm afraid so. Politely, I'm sorry. He goes on humming. Heffalump, I suppose I'd better be getting back. Piglet, looking up carelessly. Must you? Well, if you see Christopher Robin anywhere, you might tell him I want him. Heffalump, eager to please. Certainly, certainly. He hurries off. Pooh, who wasn't going to be there, but we find we can't do without him. Oh, Piglet, how brave and clever you are. Piglet, modestly. Not at all, Pooh. And then when Christopher Robin comes, Pooh can tell him all about it. From The Book of Five Rings, by Miyamoto Musashi. The notion of catching, utsurasuru, applies to many things. Yawning and sleepiness, for example. Time can also be catching. In a large-scale battle, when the enemy is restless and trying to bring a quick conclusion to the battle, pay no attention. Instead, try to pretend that you are calm and quiet, with no urgent need to end the battle. The enemy will then be affected by your calm and easy attitude and become less alert. When this catching occurs, quickly execute a strong attack to defeat the enemy. There is also a concept called making one drunk, which is similar to the notion of catching. You can make your opponent feel bored, carefree, or feeble-spirited. You should study these matters well. From The Path to Power, The Years of Lyndon Johnson, Volume 1, by Robert A. Caro. The other improvement was his father's inspiration. Lyndon Johnson was very dejected as he sat, on the day the express poll appeared, in his parents' home in Johnson City, after hours of campaigning, talking to his parents, his brother, his Uncle Tom, his cousin Ava Johnson Cox, and Ava's 8-year-old son William, known as Corky. The leaders were almost all against him, he said. He had several large rallies scheduled, and he had not been able to persuade a single prominent individual to introduce him. So, Ava recalls, in a recollection echoed by Lyndon's brother, his daddy said, "If you can't use that route, why don't you go the other route?" "What other route?" Lyndon asked, and his daddy mapped it out for him. There was a tactic, Sam Johnson said, that could make the leader's opposition work for him instead of against him. The same tactic, Sam said, could make the adverse newspaper polls work for him instead of against him. It could even make the youth issue work for him. If the leaders were against him, he told his son, stop trying to conceal that fact. Emphasize it in a dramatic fashion. If he was behind in the race, emphasize that in a dramatic fashion. If he was younger than the other candidates, emphasize that. Lyndon asked his father what he meant, and his father told him. If no leader would introduce Lyndon, Sam said, he should stop searching for mediocre adults as substitutes, but instead should be introduced by an outstanding young child. And the child should introduce him not as an adult would introduce him, but with a poem, a very special poem. And when Lyndon asked who the child should be, Sam smiled and pointed to Ava's son. In an area in which horsemanship was one of the most esteemed talents, Corky Cox was, at the age of 8, already well known for the feats of riding and calf roping with which he had swept the children's events in recent rodeos. The best young cowboy in the hill country, people were calling him. Corky can do it, Sam said. All the next day, Sam trained him. He wanted Corky to really shout out thousands, Ava recalls. He wanted him to smack down his hand every time he said that word. I can still see Uncle Sam smacking down his hand on the kitchen table to show Corky how. And that night, at a rally in Henley, in Hayes County, Lyndon Johnson told the audience, they say I'm a young candidate. Well, I've got a young campaign manager, too. And he called Corky to the podium. And Corky, smacking down his hand, recited a stanza of Edgar A. Guest's It Couldn't Be Done. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin, just take off your coat and go to it. Just start in to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. And lastly, from the I Ching. Conditions are such that the hostile forces favored by the time are advancing. In this case, retreat is the right course, and it is through retreat that success is achieved. But success consists in being able to carry out the retreat correctly. Retreat is not to be confused with flight. Flight means saving oneself under any circumstances, whereas retreat is a sign of strength. We must be careful not to miss the right moment while we are in full possession of power and position. Then we shall be able to interpret the signs of the time before it is too late and to prepare for provisional retreat instead of being drawn into a desperate life-and-death struggle. Thus, we do not simply abandon the field to the opponent. We make it difficult for him to advance by showing perseverance in single acts of resistance. In this way, we prepare, while retreating, for the counter-movement. Understanding the laws of a constructive retreat of this sort is not easy. The meaning that lies hidden in such a time is important. Chapter 10. Create a threatening presence. Deterrence strategies. The best way to fight off aggressors is to keep them from attacking you in the first place. To accomplish this,